Now let's take a look at how the BigQuery interface works. So on the left here, you can see the Explorer, which shows all the data that I have access to. And so to get a table in BigQuery, first of all, you open the name of the project, and then you look at the datasets that are available within this project. You open a dataset, and finally you see a table such as characters. And if I click now on characters, I will open the table view. Now in the table view, I will find a lot of important information about my table in these tabs over here. So let's look at the first tab, schema. The schema tab shows me the structure of my table, which, as we shall see, is very important. And the schema is defined essentially by two things: the name of each column in my table and the data type of each column. So here we see that the characters table contains a few columns such as ID, name, guild, class, and so on. And these columns have different data types. For example, ID is an integer, which means that it contains natural numbers, whereas name is string, which means that it contains text. And as we shall see, the schema is very important because it defines what you can do with the table. And next, we have the details tab, which contains a few things. First of all is the table ID, and this ID represents the full address of the table. And this address is made up of three components. First of all, you have the ID of the project, which is, as you can see, the project in which I'm working, and is the same that you see here on the left in the Explorer tab. The next component is the dataset that contains the table, and again you see it in the Explorer tab. And finally you have the name of the table. This address is important because it's what we use to reference the table, and it's what we use to get data from this table. And then we see a few more things about the table, such as when it was created, when it was last modified. And here we can see the storage information. So we can see here that this table has 15 rows, and on the disk it occupies approximately 1 kilobyte. If you work extensively with BigQuery, this information will be important for two reasons. Number one, it defines how much you are paying every month to store this table. And number two, it defines how much you would pay for a query that scans all the data in this table. And as we have seen in the lecture on BigQuery pricing, these are the two determinants of BigQuery costs. However, for the purpose of this course, you don't need to worry about this because the tables we are working with are so small that they won't put a dent in your free monthly allowance for using BigQuery. Next, we have the preview tab, which is really cool to get a sense of the data. And this basically shows you a graphical representation of your table. And as you will notice, it looks very similar to a spreadsheet. So you can see our columns, the same ones that we saw in the schema tab: ID, name, guild, and so on. And as you remember, we saw that ID is an integer column, so it can only contain numbers. Name is a text column. And then you see that this table has 15 rows, and because it's such a small table, all of it fits into this graphical representation. But in the real world, you may have tables with millions of rows, and in this case, the preview will show you only a small portion of that table, but still enough to get a good sense of the data. Now, there are a few more tabs in the table view. We have lineage, data profile, data quality, but I'm not going to look at them now because they are like advanced features in BigQuery and you won't need them in this course. Instead, I will run a very basic query on this table, and this is not for the purpose of understanding the query, that will come soon. It is for the purpose of showing you what the interface looks like after you run a query. So I have a very basic query here that will run on my table, and you can see that the interface is telling me how much data this query will process. And this is important because this is the main determinant of cost in BigQuery. Every query scans a certain amount of data and you have to pay for that. But as we saw in the lecture of BigQuery pricing, this table is so small that you could run 1,000,000 or more of these queries and not exhaust your monthly allowance. So if you see 1 kilobyte, you don't have to worry about that. So now I will click run and my query will execute, and here I get the query results view. This is the view that appears after you have successfully run a query. So we have a few tabs here, and the first tab that you see is results, and this shows you graphically the table that was returned by your query. So as we shall see, every query in SQL runs on a table and returns a table. And just like the preview tab showed you a graphical view of your table, the results tab shows you a graphical view of the table that your query has returned. And this is really the only tab in the query results view that you will need on this course. The other ones show different features or more advanced features that we won't look at, but feel free to explore them on your own if you are curious. But what's also important in this view is this button over here, Save Results, which you can use to export the result of your query towards several different destinations, such as Google Drive or local files on your computer in different formats, or another BigQuery table, a spreadsheet in Google Sheets, or even copying them to your clipboard so that you can paste them somewhere else. But we shall discuss this more in detail in the lecture on getting data in and out of BigQuery. Finally, if you click on this little keyboard icon up here, you can see a list of shortcuts that you can use in the BigQuery interface. And if you end up running a lot of queries and you want to be fast, this is a nice way to improve your experience with BigQuery. So be sure to check these out.